Well, what I'll go through today is I'll go through some of the things that that govern movement and in both the body and the brain and the neurological system. Earlier this year, I presented at the World Conference for Neuro Rehabilitation, and so I'll go through some of the points that were put across there and are basically seen as the latest thinking in neurological rehab. And then I'll talk about some of the things that we can do. There were some written questions that were submitted previously. I'll go through them at the end. And as Tracy just said there, if anyone's got any questions, they can just throw them in as we go. And I'll answer them. If there's any burning issues as and when we go, or certainly if there's anything that you don't understand, just raise a hand, shout out, or whatever notification medium, Zoom, lens available, and I'll just stop and chat then. Hopefully it come across already. I'm fairly relaxed about all this stuff, so don't think twice about trying to get me attention and get me to clarify something. Or even more importantly, if you either don't accept, refute, or disagree with anything I'm saying, I'd be even more keen to hear from you then. So if I just try and do a little bit of week one, day one mechanics and physics, I'll just share my screen and I'll get a presentation up. Just bear with me. You should be able to see my screen. Is that coming through, Trace? You give me a thumbs up. Yeah. You can see a seesaw there with a weight either end. I suspect everyone would agree that if a seesaw presented like that, the 100 kilo end would go down and the other end would go up. But then if we move the weight along, what I'll be looking for there in moving the weight is try to find a point where I could move that 100 kilo to, and the 50 kilo would actually balance it. And so what we're starting to talk about here is mechanical advantage, where if we move on to the next one, where the 50 kilo, even though it's the lighter weight, that could start dictating the direction of the movement, that could control the movement. If we move on there, and you see these three doors, a similar principle applies here. Now, you can see the door handle is being placed in a different position on each of the doors. And I'm obviously not wanting to insult anyone's intelligence here, trying to establish some premises which will become relevant later on. That same principle of leverage is being demonstrated here. I suspect everyone would probably choose to place the door handle similar to the door that presents on the left. It'd be far easier to open the door. Now, it's the same door, it's the same U, and it's the same handle. It's just placed in a different place. So this is just underlining the impact that that mechanics can have, mechanical advantage in particular, and how you, if you're wanting to affect and control movement, how you want biomechanical advantage working for you, as opposed to biomechanical disadvantage working against you. We then look at these different structures here and have a think about which one would be the most stable structure, which one would be able to support the most weight, which one would need guide ropes if any weight was actually added to it, or may even need guide ropes just to stand up as it presents. and then which ones would present the greatest challenge if you were to try to move the structure. Now, all of this, let's say, elementary school physics might be confusing you somewhat. However, if I just change the next slide into that, it might start making it a little bit clearer of where I'm going with all of this. You can see on the left, which would be the standard anatomical presentation of the human skeleton. And then somewhat clumsily, but all the same, on the images over to the right, show the various compensations that start to come in to the human posture. If an appropriate movement lifestyle isn't lived by the subject. Now, that's a little bit of a fancy way of saying whether the person lives in the West and whether he sits down more than the body was designed to do. The issues about how much weight you can control, whether you've got biomechanical advantage working for you, and also whether you can exhibit balance. Now, if you look at the image on the left, there's no control that's required. That just has balance in situ. The attribute of balance is inherent in the structure, so there's no need for an outside control. In any of the other postures, which aren't necessarily that stable, well, potentially there might be a need for a control. So that's sort of the hardware side of things of how your body works and deals with movement. On the neurological side, the brain grows. It's constantly changing and changing, growing and shrinking in its neurological capacity. And the way it sustains this sort of growth, you can think of your brain like a giant field of wheat. And when we first come on the scene, we're like that virgin field of wheat, and there's no patterns there. There's no pathways across. So we have to build these pathways ourselves. Now, the first time you walk through that field of wheat, you'll create a path. Now, depending on how often you walk down that path will dictate how easy it is to follow, how quickly you can go on that path. And if you keep repeatedly using it, it will become easier to follow and you'll be able to move quicker on it. However, the less and less you use that pathway, the more the wheat will be able to grow back. And over time, it'll become less easy to follow, less easy to travel quickly. And potentially, if you leave it long enough, it can become hidden from view completely. Now, these paths through the wheat field, that's how your brain learns movement and learns skills, including thinking as well as controlling movement. And that's why you get better if you practice something. The more and more you practice something, the more and more you're walking through that path in the wheat field. And the more and more it becomes easy to follow and quicker to follow. Now, one path can lead into another. If a path starts off looking for a similar destination, well, then you can break off from that path and form a network of paths, some of them dependent on others, some not. Now, what happens when you have neurological injury? Some of those pathways are removed. And for some of us, in the most severe cases, all of the pathways are as good as removed. For those who don't know me, and I know Sandra's probably fairly familiar with my my story. I had quite a severe brainstem stroke in May 2017. After the stroke, I lost the ability to walk. I had 2.5 weeks in hospital until I had my surgery. I'd relearned walking within that time, but then after the surgery hit me really hard, and never mind, just lost the ability to walk. I lost the ability to even crawl. So all those paths across the wheat field had to be retread. Now, when you're building a path for movement, you can only build a skill for a range of movement that exists. Now, this sort of brings me on to what we were talking about, or what I was talking about with respect to the body mechanics, and then why I took the pole. Now, with the change in postures, and I'll just get them up again. Actually, I'll share the screen. When you've got that change in posture, that's to represent what happens classically to people's posture in the when you live in the Western world, when you sit down too much. The body is not designed to sit on chairs. There were no chairs and tables in the Serengeti where all this kit was designed, so that just didn't enter into the evolutionary equation. So if you look at the second posture from the left, and what that's representing there is the hips being the posture of the hips being changed significantly. Now, when you sit down, your hip flexors are shortened, and they're shortened quite considerably. And if you sit down long enough, which for all of us sitting here is a period of years, it'll start to have a long-lasting effect if you don't actively correct that impact. And if you don't correct it, over time, your hips will become fully tilted forward, and you will have postural adaptations to that. But one of the key things is functionally, your hips will be taken out the game. Now, the hips are the strongest thing that we've got. Now, if you look at the way that your joints work, if you look at my finger here, or even better, if you look at my arm, if I want to raise my arm like that, this bicep here contracts and it pulls that arm up. But look where the bicep ties in. It ties in just after the elbow. Now, if this was a door, as we've shown before, where would we put the handle? We put the handle here if we wanted it to have biomechanical advantage. But because we want to be able to use the arm, the muscle ties in here. Now, that's the same for practically every joint in the body, except with your hips. With your hips, your door handle's in the right place. It's got biomechanical advantage. Also, what's the largest muscle in the body? Largest muscle is the gluteus maximus. Some might say it's the latissimus dorsi, the lats, but both of them connect into the hips. So you've got a part of the body with the largest muscle operating the largest biomechanical advantage. So if that is taken out of the equation, all the rules change. All the rules change completely, and you're operating with biomechanical disadvantage. Now, if we go back to the pole, and I'll see if I can get this up, or rather, without looking at the pole, I know that for the fact the majority of people who have acquired neurological injury, be that to the brain or to the spinal cord, are probably going to be 60 plus, definitely 50 plus. Now, when you consider the movement quality and posture of people living in the West, well, once you get to, well, in today's world, probably once you get to 30, but certainly once you start hitting 40 and 50, people's posture, range of movement, and mechanics have somewhat degraded. I mean, to have a little bit of an example, I don't know if anyone's going to be brave enough to speak up, and if they don't, I'm going to pick on you, Tracy. Has anybody got a physical injury that's been caused by age? Just raise your hand or take yourself off mute and shout out. Or are we going to throw Tracy under the bus? Right, Tracy, get yourself off mute. Do you have any physical ailments that are down to age?
Well, okay, I'd say yes. A bit of osteoarthritis in my fingers, these two fingers.
Those two fingers, and is
Yeah,
that caused by age?
Yeah, well, I think caused by age and hereditary, obviously, I think, osteoarthritis in these fingers. And the site, I think, because I have a brainstem cavernoma, the site, Steve, is a deficit of the cavernoma, but it is also a deficit of age.
Yeah, it's in that you went into it, the age, but the fingers, that ailment is caused by age, right?
Yes.
Now, are those fingers a different age than your other fingers?
Well, I'd like to.
I would suggest not.
I think my left hand might have come out before my right hand, so that might have made that second older than this one.
Well, I think we would probably start measuring age from conception. But those fingers are the same age as the other fingers, so it's not age. Age hasn't caused it. Now, what age gives you? It gives you time. And if over time you accrue a certain consequence as a result of action, inaction, or something else, you can accrue it more and more over time. But it's not age that does that. It's like somebody, if they put their knee pain down to age. Well, if it's the same age as the other knee, it's time itself is not the culprit. And so if you lead this inauthentic movement lifestyle that we do lead in the West, when you come to the age of 40, 50, 60, then people are going to have compromised posture, and posture dictates function. And so they'll have compromised function. Now, it doesn't necessarily stop you living a wide and varied life. It will mitigate your performance, definitely. But then depending on intensity, frequency, and duration, does that impact your life? Well, it might not. So another question I would ask then, just go straight to Tracy. Trace, can you do can you do a deep squat?
What now?
Well, not now.
Oh.
I'll see if I can for the camera. Let's see if I can get it.
Well, you have to might stop sharing your screen, Steve, and we can see you in a full deep squat then.
Let's see if I can get myself down just so I am now in a deep squat.
Oh, you are.
So I'm down here, and I'm reasonably functionally fit, so I can do that. However, can you do that, Trace? For example,
I can actually. Oddly, I'm quite flexible. I can actually do that, but yeah, it probably took me a little longer, I would say, getting up than you just did, but I can get down there. Well, definitely.
Well, I'm 50, and for the most part, I would suggest most 50-year-olds can't do a deep squat.
Oh.
And most 50-year-olds would put that down to age. Now, that's absolute nonsense. If we go back out to the Serengeti and maybe look at the Kalahari Bushmen, or basically look at any population on the planet that doesn't have the Sir Thomas Crapper available to it, i.e. the sit-down toilet, everybody has to squat at least once a day. And in all of these cultures, nobody loses the squat, no matter what their age is. So age doesn't take that squat away. It's what you do during that age. Another example, as I mentioned, I had my brainstem stroke. I taught myself to walk within the 2.5 weeks that I was in hospital. And then the day before my surgery, I had an assessment by a physio and a doctor at the same time. Now, out of the 3 people in the room, only one of us could do a deep squat. And I imagine you can guess who it is. And both the physio and the doctor would have been seen as normal, able-bodied people, but they couldn't do a deep squat. Now, before you think I'm getting evangelistic about this or picking on people, it might seem tangential, British Army, certainly in the US Army, you get taught different positions to fire your rifle in. And it can be, standing up, that in a kneeling position. And it used to be the squat. The squat is a really good position to fire a weapon from, because you're really low, so you're a low target. You're stable, and you can also transition onto your feet very quickly. And as far as a soldier in a firefight goes, it's a great position. Neither the British Army nor the US Army have the squat as a firing position now. They did in the Second World War, but the mobility within society has changed that much. And a soldier would be considered one of the fitter or better movement lifestyles in today's society. That's been wiped out. Perpetual sitting and the impact on the hips and posture. It's no longer a viable fire position. So, be all that as it may, I'll now go into some of the stuff from the World Conference for Neuro Rehabilitation. And I'll hopefully tie all of this up by the end, if any of you are scratching your heads at the moment.
Steve, let me just say, when you're doing your movements on the screen, maybe unshare your screen. So some people have different iPads and things and can't actually see you doing the physical movements. So they missed your superb squat. So you might have to do a second superb squat at the end.
Well,
that's the way.
If there is, in fact, customer demand for such a thing,
yeah,
I'll bring that in. However,
yeah,
I'm not planning on any further movements other than with the mouth.
Fair enough.
I missed it, Steve. Look.
Yeah.
You snooze, you lose. Right. This was a sizable conference held over, I think it was 5 days in October. Unfortunately, COVID-19 done me out of a nice trip to Lyon in France, and it was all done online, which, some you win, some you lose. I posted my presentation on the forum. So some of you may or may not have seen it already. If you want a copy of it, it's a 2-minute video and a single page PowerPoint, just get in touch with either me or Tracy, and there's no problem at all. Now, this presentation, I'm gonna take some of the graphics from and some of the details from was one of the headline presentations around relearning to walk, following stroke, as you can see there. Now, Klaus Martin, Stephen, and Dominic Perrineau, they're two of the foremost names in the area of neuro rehab. And what they were here, you can see them talking about the periods of recovery after stroke in particular here. I will just change that, zoom into the graph here. Now, what they were saying, and this was prevalent across, across every presentation I saw in and around the subject, is that after 6 months, the industry standard belief is there are no significant or major improvements that are possible after 6 months. If I go back there, we go through the phases here. Essentially, we've got chronic and acute. The acute phase of recovery is up to 6 months. Anything after that is you're termed as being in chronic recovery. Just as an illustration, I think in the States there's currently 7 million people who are in the chronic phase of post-stroke recovery. The humps you can see at the start are around the immediate trauma of a bleed and or surgery. So I'll just take them out of the graph so it doesn't obscure it. Now, the green line here represents what it calls here is endogenous plasticity. That's like that field of wheat I was talking about. And plasticity is your brain's ability to create new paths through the field of wheat, and how receptive it is to your attempts to build new paths. And then the orange line indicates your actual function and skills. So if we take it that as a result of the injury, you lose all of your movement skills, it says here that you can start to recover them in 1 to 7 days. That rate of recovery is fairly consistent up until 3 months. And then after that, that levels out. If I go on to another graph, which is a very similar thing, the mark in the acute phase, everything up to that 6 months where it becomes chronic. And you can see on the left, they're indicating the percentage of recovery. And what it's trying to tell you there is that after 6 months, you've basically got all of the tools in the box that you're going to have. And it's those tools that they're the only ones you're going to get with a view to trying to build further skills and enhance your what they're saying is only really enhance your lifestyle recovery as opposed to your neurological recovery. Now, I think all but one or all but two of us here today are more than 6 months post stroke of surgery. Now that would be fairly bleak news, I would suggest. So to look at that being put forward in the World Congress, then that in itself is fairly compelling. So you'd have to ask where they got how they came to this conclusion. Now, these are extremely intelligent blokes, and extremely capable, extremely well thought of. So they're not going to be making it up. It's not going to be their opinion as such. This is going to be based on a statistically significant amount of data, i.e., loads and loads and thousands of cases. And when you look at it like that, you could then be forgiven for sort of saying, well, yeah, then that probably is. That's the rules of the game. But I would suggest looking at it in a slightly different way. As a quick recap, and apologies for those who've heard me drone on about myself before. I had some very definitive views about how physical movement skills should be rehabbed. I formed those views in the military whilst working with athletic populations. But the way we were going about trying to affect our change was very neurologically focused. So I had these ideas about when you want to correct movement, then first of all you have to get authentic posture, and then after you've got authentic posture, you have to build the skills from what are known as primitive movement patterns. These are the movement milestones that an infant human goes through when learning is more complex skills. The first of which is commonly seen as walking. Now, the baby doesn't walk immediately, doesn't fail to walk immediately because it lacks the mental maturity to work out what walking is. The baby has to go through these milestones because there's important neurological and biomechanical reasons why it has to acquire these skills. Now, if we go back to that field of wheat, if somebody's posture, i.e. someone's mechanics, starts changing as down to age as it's perceived, then the field of wheat is going to have to change as well. If things are working differently, they need different neurological control. So the field of wheat starts gradually changing, and new pathways start getting formed from the ones that were based on an authentically working body, a posturally correct body. These new patterns start getting formed. However, when you stop executing the authentic ones, the wheat starts growing back, and it can grow back to the point where they're either not available or they don't look as attractive as the new paths. So what we found when we were working, we restored posture so that they could work correctly. However, they were so used to working wrong, they carried on working wrong. So we had to reset all of these patterns and go back to putting the paths through the wheat for the primitive patterns. And so this is why I had these strong views about how rehab should be done. So following my surgery, when I could no longer have the movement skills to even crawl, my prognosis was that it would take 2 to 3 years to recover, and I would have permanent deficits and potentially need a walking adjunct. Well, this is a similar prognosis as to the data that you can see on your screen here, and that didn't chime with my views on teaching neurological skills. And as far as I was concerned, you're teaching a skill is teaching a skill. It doesn't matter, whether the person is already capable or isn't capable. The principles on what works and what doesn't are the same. So I disagreed with my physios as to what my rehab should be. I signed myself out of hospital, still unable to walk, and managed my own recovery. And I'd met all of the 2 to 3 year targets within 10 weeks. And I've been carrying on my movement recovery ever since. Now, when they say that no major improvements are available after 6 months, that is totally contrary to my experience with myself. And then, given the results I've had with myself, I've looked after the recovery of a number of brainstem patients, and the ones I've been looking after, they've for the most part been a number of years post stroke and surgery, but we're still able to make these big neurological differences or big movement differences. There's a lady I work with in the States. She was 3.5 years post stroke and surgery, still unable to walk, had cerebellar ataxia, which meant she presented like a Parkinson's victim. And she'd had 3.5 years of intensive rehab, and they'd said, right, sorry, we can't do any more for you. You've experienced all the recovery you're going to get. Now, I've been working with her since March, and in October, she took her first 4 unaided steps. Now, if that's not a major improvement, then I would like to see what the definition is. And this has been my consistent experience. If you restore mobility and then work on the primitive patterns and then build up after there, then this model just does not apply. But this model has been built on thousands and thousands of instances. But if we look at those instances and then we say the overwhelming majority of people who have an acquired brain injury are going to be, well, even if we say 40 plus, but I would suspect we're going to be looking at 50 plus as the average age, but we'll go 40 plus. The average age is 40 plus. The day before they had their acquired injury, they would have had postural compromise. They would have had a lot of movement deficits if you compare it to a functionally authentic body. So they're bringing all of these problems to the party. And then they have, let's call it a ballpark month of almost no movement whatsoever. And then on top of all of the postural compromises that they will have had as a result of that, they've got this neurological injury, which compromises everything they try and do. So they're trying to learn movement with compromised neurology, but also with compromised hardware, with compromised posture, compromised mechanics. And if your mechanics is compromised, you can't learn authentic skills. You can't learn skills for a range of movement that isn't available. That's not me. That's physics. That's telling you that. And so when we go on to back to the conference here and back to that presentation, they then talk about their strategies for recovering movement, and they classify them in the three categories you can see here: being someone who's unable to walk, walking with help, and then independent walking. And the walking with help is emblematic of the sort of rehab strategies that get employed. You'll see here, I must admit, it always infuriates me when people just read straight from the PowerPoint, but I'm going to do that anyway. In patients who cannot walk, intensive task-specific training, e.g., high number of repetitions of the full gait cycle, supports recovery of basic walking abilities in the subacute stage after stroke. Now, high number of repetitions is walking through the wheat field. It's walking and walking over that same path and then gradually trying to change that path. But then we already know that the paths in the wheat field, the ones you can take, are dictated by what posture you have available. Now, if that hasn't been corrected, if people are going in with a 40, 50-year-old Western world posture, then the repetitions that they're going to be performing are poor quality repetitions. And if they are successful to any degree, they're only going to be successful in reinforcing compromised movement. So this is the reason for why the stats are saying what they are, and why they're saying people can't improve after 6 months. And whilst I'll accept, I had quite an athletic background. But I haven't got magic genes, not by any stretch. I've never been at the forefront of skill or talent in any of my peer groups. I've just been pretty good at being bloody minded and being persistent. So the reason for my recovery hasn't been magic genes. It's been the way I've structured my movement recovery. And then that's absolutely been the same with everyone else. If it was just me, people could have that argument that I'm I am an anomaly. There we go, got it out. I'm an anomaly. Oh, Jesus. You know what I am not. But with having the consistent results with others, I think it's staring in the face. And when if you consider it logically, that the people going in to into the event where they have this neurological compromise, then their movement is compromised even further for that initial month where they're doing next to nothing. To then try to get them to walk straight away when they've lost these primitive patterns, it's like trying to build a 10-story building and starting at the 6th floor. And this is why the results are as they are, and so persistently discouraging. And that's what I'd like to put out, is that it absolutely doesn't have to be that way. And if you want to look as a way forward for going about your rehab, the first thing you have to do is restore authentic mobility. You can't learn skills in a range of movement which is not available to you. And then once you've restored you should look at acquiring your primitive skills first and address them one by one, and ensure, first of all, you've got the requisite mobility for the skill you're looking to acquire. Then in the acquisition of that, hopefully that will maintain that mobility. Then you look to the next, look to the next, and look to the next. And it's only after you have acquired all of those movement milestones that are associated with the movement growing baby that you should then start looking at complex skills such as walking. The neuroplasticity doesn't just apply to movement. It applies to every aspect of brain function. Another example, I think I'm about 3.5 years post stroke and surgery now. If I go back to, I think it was May of this year, I'm still trying to rehab my running skills. My quality of movement slow time is pretty damn good, I suppose, certainly for a 50-year-old, but usually compared to most 20-year-olds, my quality of movement is really good. It's something I have to work at. However, if I try to speed up the movement, it then starts becoming more challenging. And what used to happen with my running, which I'm still rehabbing, is that the moment I'd start running, I would lose my peripheral vision, and my visual acuity would also go as well. Back in May, I stopped losing. I was able to keep my peripheral vision, and now my visual acuity doesn't deteriorate either. And it's your visual skills will improve with neuroplasticity as well. Now, I don't doubt there can be some physical structures and neurological structures which once compromised, can potentially not be replaced by function elsewhere, or certainly not replaced as well as. But that doesn't mean that you don't strive to acquire all of the skills that you possibly can elsewhere. It certainly doesn't mean you should accept a flawed model. So that's pretty much it from me. And just to sort of summarize, think of your brain and your neurology as this field of wheat, and the more and more you go down the same path, the easier it is to follow that path, and the quicker you can follow it. But make sure it's the correct path as well. If you do something badly, if all you do is just repeat it and repeat it and repeat it as your practice, you will get good at doing it badly. Practice does not make perfect. Practice makes permanent. Practice makes this path through the wheat field permanent. You want perfect practice to make perfect. hopefully I've given a window to show how current recovery expectations are based on subjects who had compromised movement before brain injury. And then if you compromise their movement further through a month in a hospital bed, and then also with neurological compromise, that's what drives these low expectations. And then if we can restore correct body mechanics, we then have a chance at restoring correct neurological skills. If you don't do the mechanics first, then you can't learn skills in ranges of movement which aren't available. That's just about it from me. I will have. I remembered we do have a couple of questions. I will dig them out from my email from Tracy. Unless you have them to hand, Tracy, I should have.
I can have a little look. I don't have them to hand.
No, it's all right. I've got one here. One's from Curtis Simmons. Is Curtis with us? No? Oh, well, fair one.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, it has a medication-related question, which I could chat about, but not with any authority. So, especially with him not being here, I will skip past that one. And then Kay Meredith. Is Kay with us?
I don't think so either, no.
No? Okay, hers was with respect to Botox, and she's 14 years on. It would have been good to chat with her with it being so many years on. But again, with the Botox, it's not an area of expertise of mine, so I won't wax lyrical on it. So does anyone else have any questions?
Unmute yourself. Yeah.
Can I disagree slightly with you?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, with the whole like perfect practice makes permanent, like idea, some of the research that I've been looking at, so I'm interested at it more from a horse side of it, but also the stuff I've been reading about, I have been putting towards myself in my own recovery, because like I just had surgery back in January this year to remove a brainstem carcinoma after 2.5 bleeds. But the thing I was going to argue on is, so there's research or like thinking that whole perfect practice makes permanent. It only makes permanent for a limited, for exactly what you're practicing, as in you aren't able to transfer those skills that you've learned in that perfect practice onto other movement skills. And what I find interesting is the idea more that instead of perfect practice, instead of telling someone exactly how they should be doing certain movements, more looking at it from a, how do I give this person a movement problem that they can solve in such a way that they move how I want them to, like if it's a horse, or how do I like give myself the input to like move in a more correct way. I don't have my thoughts fully together on it.
That's all right. To be honest, Charlotte, I can see exactly where you're going, and I think we're actually in violent agreement. Okay. When I say perfect practice makes perfect, it's simply a statement around the pathway that you're going on that one pathway. The more and more you walk down that pathway, the quicker you can travel, and the more easy to follow it is. Which for that pattern and that pattern only, if you start going towards, let's call it perfection, which is a flawed term, but just for use our terms of reference. So the more and more you use that one pattern, the closer to perfect you're going to get. Now, this is really specific the way these things work. So just because you can do one thing correctly, the idea as to whether or not you can then transfer it to something else it's never a given. So, for instance, I was talking about the primitive movement patterns. It's all of those patterns which there's a combination thereof that support all other authentic movement. Now, if you have a compromised primitive pattern, you can still build on it. You can still have other patterns that come off it. It's just that you're putting a glass ceiling in place, and that glass ceiling how high it is depends on how compromised that primitive pattern is. Now, that the height of that ceiling might well mean that you can perform to a satisfactory level, albeit a compromised one, or it might even be that the glass ceiling's that low that any performance of that pattern will get injury. Now, if you restore that primitive pattern, if you correct that primitive pattern, well, those other skills were based on the old one. So you're actually, that won't automatically transfer and give you perfection in that other task. It just gives you the opportunity to build authentic skills on top of the primitive one that you've got. The way you can look at it, I'm obviously going to be kicking metaphors around here. You can look the way you build your skills as putting books on a bookshelf. I should translate from the Scouse, shouldn't I? Books on a bookshelf.
I was going to say that. You mean books, Steve?
Well, close to Halloween, aren't we? Let's go for books. No, so putting books on a bookshelf. Now, the order in which you put the books on can't be changed. You put a book on, you put on book 1, book 2, book 3, book 6, book 7, and then you think, hang on, this ain't working. I'm missing books 4 and 5. You can't shuffle the books around. You've got to start a new bookshelf. Now, what you can do is have a bookshelf with 1, 2, and 3 on. And if you've got that bookshelf, well, you can start immediately from there. So in that example I gave you before, you wouldn't have to then go back to 1. You could start, well, I'll just take 1, 2, 3, and then I'll put 4 and 5 next to that. But you can't rearrange the books on the bookshelf. It's it's an all or nothing thing. Now you can take a bookshelf that's in existence and then start building on top of that, and then you can either keep or prune that one, but keep that basic one again. But you can't rearrange them. And I don't know whether, hopefully that's made it clearer and not more complicated.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. And then another idea I find kind of interesting as well is the idea that movements that you are told to do, as in if I tell you to move your hand from out flat, your arm from like stretched out to touching your shoulder, like it's different, or like neurologically it's processed differently or something, I think, between being told to do something and you figuring that out as like a solution. So I think in human rehab, in rehab from like injuries or so, and some of the top like sports rehab ones, instead of telling a person to do this exact movement like 5, 10, 15 times, they instead set them a problem where the result is that they do that movement, but it's intrinsically motivated.
Absolutely. It's about using a reason to move.
Yeah, exactly.
Your neurology understands a reason to move and will bring everything together in a team to solve the problem that you're putting in front of it. Whereas too much within rehab, or certainly older rehab strategies, would be about isolating function and often and still isolating muscles and doing repetition of like bicep curls, doing that to help the bicep. Well, it doesn't help it. It gets it good at doing that. There's that practice thing again. You can't then take that bicep and apply that benefit to everything involving the bicep, because it all works in a team. You know, I hesitate using football analogies, but if you had a footballer that plays in a certain position, you can't just have him training by himself and say, right, you're a right back, or you're a centre forward. You just practice centre forward things, and then on game day, expect him to be able to slot into the team and play with the team. It doesn't work like that. It's exactly as you're saying, Charlotte. You need to be have a reason to move, because then your neurology understands that and brings everything to the party that should be. And it means that you don't execute the movement cognitively, because when it comes to real movement, you don't cognitively control it. Your neurology responds to being given a task. So violent agreement yet again, Charlotte.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, it's just interesting. I find this whole area really interesting. And like I said, I first came towards it like from a horse point of view, looking at like horse training and so on. And then courtesy of the brain bleeds and surgery, I was then like, hang on a second, this actually applies to me too.
Yeah. Well, try teaching someone to ride a horse without a horse. You know, it's not going to happen, is it?
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
Not so
You
well.
need every member of the team involved.
There is a witch's broom. Some of us couldn't afford a horse, Steve. So witch's broom.
Yeah, not me.
Okay, so anyone else have any questions? We have run out of time, really, but we would like to entertain any questions or anything anyone would like to ask. Please unmute yourself. We've got about another 10 minutes, I should imagine, of Steve's time, which I think...
Can I just ask a wee question? Steve, just out of interest with your progress then, on a day-to-day basis, do you still get days where you feel that you've improved and then you get another day where you've gone backwards, or do you feel you're
what I experienced previously, not so much these days, but certainly in the days where I was making more sort of day-by-day progress or big jumps, and then experiencing the trough that you're talking about there, I would get huge neuro fatigue. Now this is anecdotal. Now this is not me telling you how physiology works, but the way that I came to interpret it, I used to see the neuro fatigue as a positive sign, because it would happen every time I acquired a new neurological skill. Once I first exhibited efficacy, or as soon as I did something well and authentic and I got it, I would then have fatigue afterwards, and it almost as if it's reinforcing the learning. And then when I came out of the fatigue, I would still have that skill, and I would have a broader skill set to move forward with that. And I was always looking at trying to expand the quality and the expansiveness of the movement in my skill set. So I absolutely would go up and down. I would go up and down, but on the continuum overall would be upward, but along that line would be peaks and troughs. So you know, I absolutely did. And it's been my experience with the people who I work with as well. I was working with that American girl she's now, I think, 4.5 years post stroke and surgery, and she absolutely gets those big neuro fatigue incidences, but it's consistent with a big jump forward. And none of the rehab strategies which I would advocate or which I undertook myself is based on effort. It's always just based on quality of movement training, smart and not hard. Unfortunately, now just getting into the sort of territory where I can thrash myself a bit and just get some enjoyment and some performance fitness out of it. But that's all you get out of it. You don't get quality of movement out of thrashing yourself, to be honest. it can actually be the opposite. Because if you introduce fatigue, fatigue never improves the quality of anyone's movement, or very rarely.
See, I'm thinking like I'm 5 years, but I actually think looking, sort of since I've been doing a lot of the Zoom, I actually still think I'm really quite a weak body. And since COVID, sort of about end of August, something just really changed in me. I haven't got any idea what it was, but I just went really weak. I was getting so I could at least get down and get myself up. Now I'm having to, if I try, crawl across to something and push myself up, and my head has just been an absolute nightmare. But my scan came back clear, there's nothing there, but we're now just scanning all my, I said to you the other night, didn't I, my sinuses, because the pressure, if you notice me keep holding my head, the pressure in my head right here is just so intense that I struggle, very much so. And this is, it just seemed like, wow, I just can't get past this.
Did that technique give you any relief, by the way? With the sinuses?
I haven't found massive, but I did. The very first one that I did, I felt a difference, but I haven't. I just think I can't.
Quite a tricky maneuver to self-apply.
Well, I kept looking at because I have to look anyway and go over before my brain will go, right, yeah, I've got this one kind of thing and start it.
It can be dead easy for me to sort of, throw around, do this or do that, and it be the cure to all sort of situations. What I would say is that it doesn't matter doesn't matter how you're presenting. Your quality of movement will create either a vicious circle or a virtuous one. If you improve the quality of your movement and technique, then things get easier. The easier they get, the more you can do them and take advantage of what they offer, and the more and more you can walk down that path through the wheat field. Because that's certainly one of the problems in the earlier days, is that the fatigue hits you so much that every time you walk down one path through the wheat field, it just starts growing back. And so that's the aspect of the vicious circle. And the more tired you are, the more you sit down and the less you move, and so the less movement medicine you get. So certainly just over the Zoom meeting, that's all I could really say. I mean, there's huge implications for your fascial health, and the musculoskeletal issues around the neck and shoulders that will create all of the problems you're talking about. But there's also a lot of other stuff that can cause that as well. So it would be difficult for me to say, right, this is what that problem is. But I would definitely look at, get yourself some nice massage around the neck, traps and shoulders, and work on your breathing patterns.
I was seeing a cranial osteopath, but obviously with lockdown and now again kind of thing. But I mean, my head is so what I call abnormal. This side of my head is still very, I don't understand it at all. I can't understand it because that's very much like, I call it my little alien head. It's always on the go. Whereas I do feel, thankfully, this side is, so at least that gives me some compensation to having some. Down behind my ear.
Yeah. And
but I was sort of left with like.
Is the scar sort of raised and bubbly? Or is it nice and smooth?
Yeah.
Well, it's nice and smooth, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, fair one. Because you can get a lot of scar tissue building up around the actual scar. No surprise in that. And that can cause fascial restrictions there as well. And there's an intervention, called the Graston technique, or in layman's terms, just scraping. And it works on taking away scar tissue and releasing fascial adhesions. And the fascial adhesions is where there's a layer of tissue, which is your fascia, that covers all of you, that should glide both over and between everything in which it's in contact with. But then if it sticks, it then compromises movement there, and it can, for instance, fascial restrictions here can stop me turning and looking as far as I normally would over one side of the shoulder. Fascial restrictions at the back of the head, in much the same way as muscle tension there, can cause headaches, brain fog, can compromise vision, and relieving of that, the fascial adhesions and muscle tension there can improve all of that. And for a lot of people, removing the muscle tension in their traps just takes the headaches away immediately. Lots of success with that. And that's brain injury patients or non-brain injury patients. The classic reasons for that are compromised breathing patterns. Sitting down shuts down the diaphragm. The diaphragm is the main breathing muscle that should work from here, right under the ribs. When you breathe in, it should push everything down, and that's how you should take your breath in. However, the seated posture compromises the diaphragm, so more and more people start breathing in by lifting their shoulders, which is the neck, traps, and shoulders do that. Now, average reasonably fit person will take about 10 breaths per minute at rest. That's 600 per hour. 600 times 24 is 14,800. So imagine 14,800 inappropriate muscle twitches. That's going to cause an overhead, and those muscles get stiff, tight, dysfunctional. Pressure on the occipital region, the occipital nerve comes up here, and so you'll get pressure headaches here. And also the occipital region, there's a lot of visual processing there, and that will cause visual compromise.
Okay, Steve, we might have to just end it there. So any other questions, you can always put them in the chat, and I'll save the chat and I shall forward them on to Steve. So is there anything else that you would like to ask, or you can always, I'll just quickly put my email address in the everywhere chat box, which is tracy@cavernoma.org.uk. So you can email me there, and if you need to, and we can forward the questions on to Steve. And just like to say thank you on behalf of CA UK, Steve, for everything, absolutely everything you do. You don't just do this, and you do an awful lot for us, and I certainly have appreciated